Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Take a plane, take a train, take a car, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. No need to be far, just getaway, getaway, getaway now.
Hi, and welcome to Getaway Girl. I'm Regina Ayars, and I am the Getaway Girl. Although I'm certainly not a girl anymore, when I travel, I do take on a different persona, lighter, freer, more willing to just be spontaneous and able to go with the flow. I plan, but when the plan has to change, I can do it with less heartburn and a sense that it will all work out. So during the next 30 minutes, come with me and see how traveling can open up new vistas for you. This is part one of a two-part episode of Getaway Girl, where we are traveling to Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula. In February of 2018, several friends I have had since the late 60s in San Francisco, and yes, I am dating myself somewhat, we decided to get together in Merida, Mexico. One of us, Tita, had recently relocated to Merida from Florida. Tita had been inviting us to visit, and we finally decided to take her up on her invitation. Now, there are three major sections of Mexico: Baja California, Central Mexico, and the Yucatan Peninsula. I've been traveling to Mexico since I was 15, mostly to Baja and the Yucatan. Merida, population 750,000 today, is located inland on the Yucatan Peninsula and was founded in 1542 by the Spanish. This trip to Merida is my third trip to the Yucatan. I have been to Cancun, which is the major city in the Yucatan and now the largest tourist attraction, and two islands off the coast, the Isla Mujeres, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, and Cozumel. Now, I said that the Spanish founded Merida, but the Yucatan Peninsula was settled by the Mayan people who built a sophisticated civilization over 2,000 years ago. The Mayans are the indigenous people not only of the Yucatan, but also Central America. This area included the entire Yucatan Peninsula and all the territory now incorporated into modern countries of Guatemala and Belize, as well as western portions of Honduras and El Salvador. Their civilization started long before our America was discovered by the Europeans, and we took the land from the North American indigenous people, the American Indians. The Yucatan Peninsula is home to North America's largest indigenous population, which are the Mayans. Now, here's a little early history. One of the most advanced indigenous cultures of the ancient Americas, the Mayans, had been hunters and gatherers and migrated into the Yucatan Peninsula around 2500 BC. That's a long time ago. And between 300 and 900 BC, that's still a long time ago, the Mayans built several cities in the Yucatan region. Two of the most spectacular being Chichén Itzá, a city of 50,000 people at the time, and Uxmal. And I have now been to both of these ruins. We will talk about Uxmal in part two. Now, when the post-classic Mayan period ended around 1250 AD, that's still a long time ago, most cities were abandoned. The disappearance of these great Mayan civilizations remains a mystery. Had the Spanish not destroyed the majority of Mayan writings, the Mayans' fate might be known today. Now, jumping forward to 1517 AD, while on an expedition to procure land, a Spanish conquistador, Francisco Hernandez de Cordova, and you have a picture of him there, arrived on the peninsula. This was the Europeans' first encounter with what they considered advanced civilization. in the Americas with a solidly built buildings and a complex social organization, which they recognized as being comparable to those of Europe. Cordova died following a battle with the Mayans. Now, in 1527, Francisco de Mateo set out to conquer the Yucatan, but was also routed by the natives. 3 years later, he returned with his son, but again failed to overpower the indigenous people. Finally, a third attempt in 1537 was successful, and Mateo founded Merida, the present capital, in 1542. Now, this house that took up an entire block was built in 1540 in Merida to honor the Mateo family. The facade is the only remaining part of the original mansion. Its design displays elements that show the Spanish conquest and domination over the Mayans, illustrated by 2 Spanish soldiers who are standing on the heads of Mayans who have their mouths open in pain. That may be a little hard to see, but it's there. The house is now a museum with a second floor covered in murals, telling the history of the conquest and liberation of the Mayan people. In an effort to convert the indigenous people to the Catholic faith, Franciscan priests built more than 30 convents in the Yucatan and tried to replace Mayan culture with Christianity. In 1562, a Franciscan monk, Diego de Landa, ordered that all handmade Mayan books and statues be destroyed. Few of these rare and important cultural artifacts survived. In addition, Spanish oppression, now this is a horrible picture here, and disease, especially this is smallpox, significantly reduced the native population from an estimated 5 million to 100 in 1500 AD to 3.5 million a century later. Sound familiar? Smallpox killed many Native Americans. Some say that the disease was intentionally introduced to indigenous populations that had no immunity against it. These two indigenous people have more in common than not. Revolts by the indigenous Mayan people during the colonial period gave Yucatan natives the reputation of being fierce and difficult to conquer. The same was said about the Native Americans. Okay, now let's move to some recent history. When Mexico gained its independence from Spain in February 1821, the Yucatan Peninsula was part of an independent Mexican empire, but remained a very remote province. The Mayans and the Mexicans continued to fight over the Yucatan. The Mexicans, hoping to suppress the revolt, sent letters to Britain, Spain, and the United States of America, offering sovereignty over the Yucatan to any nation who could help stop the Mayans. The proposal received serious consideration in Washington, D.C., with Congress debated the proposition. However, the only action taken was to warn the European powers not to interfere in the peninsula. On August 17, 1848, the Yucatan Peninsula finally became part of Mexico. And Salvador Alvarado is considered the one true liberator of the Mayans. He became governor in 1915 and introduced social emancipation, passing laws that favored peasants, women, and education. Now, the Yucatan today, until the mid-1900s, Yucatan's only contact with the outside world was by sea. As a result, Yucatan trade with the U.S., Europe, and the Caribbean islands was far more lucrative than that of the other Mexican states. The Yucatan was linked to the rest of the Mexico by railway in 1950s and by highway a decade later. Today, the Yucatan's culture remains unique from that of other Mexican states. The Mayans were and are a proud people. And this picture is of a woman that I saw on the street in Merida. And she looked very typical to me of a Mayan person. Okay, that's the history, folks. That's over. So let's start the trip. I arrived in Houston late at night. Not Houston. I flew from Houston, and I arrived in Merida late at night. And it was dark, but it was still very warm and tropical. I recall stepping off planes in previous Mexican trips and feeling that blast of warm air, moist, humid warm air. And April and May are the hottest months, and it was only February, and it was already very, very hot. Tita, this is a picture of Tita, my hostess, who came to the airport in a cab to pick me up. She had left her car in Florida. And so any place she goes, she takes, I don't know if it's Uber, but it is a cab. And I walk right past her. And it's been 21 years since I last saw her in San Francisco. And she didn't recognize me either. And I finally turned around and called out to a woman that I thought might be Tita. And so I had Tita, and she says, Gina. And then it was as if we had seen each other only yesterday. We took a cab back to her casa, or home, and the dispatcher gave each of us a bottle of water and cookies. Now, you wouldn't get that at our airports. Our other two friends were waiting, Lydia and Carol. These two ladies came from Houston, Texas, born and bred. They came to California on a whim in their 20s. Carol stayed, and Lydia went back home. Remember, I met these women in 1969, and the history we have together is priceless. Now, the next morning, we had breakfast. This woman here was making fresh tortillas for us. They were delicious. And before I start, I wanted to make sure that you know that this blouse, if the camera could come back to me, thank you. Now this, I didn't buy too many things in Mexico, in Merida, but I did buy this one blouse. And this is handmade, and it has a beautiful design that is unique to the peninsula and specifically to the Yucatan. And it's very soft cotton. It's very nice. So, so back to our morning. After breakfast, we took a little walking tour around town. And there's always music and entertainment on the streets. And a crowd had gathered to listen to music and watch dancers. And you have a couple of pictures of that happening. This was a regular event, but activities happen spontaneously all the time. And you'll see some of that later. We decided to take a bus tour. And as I have said before, I highly recommend a tour of any city you're visiting, especially in bigger cities. You can take those big double-decker buses, and it's a great way to get the lay of the land, to decide what sites you want to see in more detail later on in your trip. Now, in the afternoon, Tita and I took a tour of a house. Really, it was a mansion, where the original lady of the house was a Mayan, and Mayans are known for sleeping in hammocks. She had hooks, these huge metal hooks, throughout the mansion for hanging up her hammock across the most elegant rooms. Now, like any American living as an expat in a foreign country, Tita volunteers. She is in charge of the House and Garden Tour, which raises money for the Merida English Library. It is staffed by volunteers and offers English language classes, books, and a gathering place for expats. Most of the expats are American and Canadian, but there was a smattering of French, Brits, and Australians. The tour happens in February before it gets too hot. Tita gets expats to allow people to visit their homes or gardens. They pay to spend a morning touring beautifully remodeled Merida houses. The homes either look like they were sitting in Miami Beach, totally Americanized, or they are traditional Spanish casas. I prefer the traditional homes. The old homes could be bought cheap years ago, but not now. This was just up my alley. I used to be a real estate agent and I love touring the houses. Now, before each tour, there is a lecture about local history from a local historian. While waiting for the first tour, a parade comes along. This was a neighborhood event. Let's take a look and listen.
Let her get across before they come along.
The first house looks like a condo in Miami with Mexican artwork. The couple had only been in the home a month. Lucky it came furnished. Let's take a look.
You know what happened? There was an impromptu Mardi Gras parade.
I know we're an hour late.
And two groups converged, and everybody got to make a
Good morning.
Oh, good morning. How are you doing?
Good.
Hi there. It's a little house.
Mackenzie had 4 properties, and his house had been on the tour in years past, and I went to it. And evidently, this was one of the 4 properties that he owned, and he sold everything and went back for health reasons to Florida. And this came on the market in October, and we were negotiating to rent the same house we rented last year. And the realtor said, this is a good deal because it's a turnkey, all the furnishings came with it. And so we've only been here since January the 11th. And her husband, who's been in this house for 8 or 9 years. So that's why it's decorated nicely. And they turned it over.
This is the one
Love this salmon color. Very nice. That salmon color. The texture of it all.
Everybody's got a pool.
I like this better.
Yeah. More garden. Well, this reminds me of that other place that we saw beside the Armacampo.
The second tour is another Miami remodel with some beautiful artwork. I hope you don't get dizzy. I was moving through these houses pretty quick with my handy iPhone.
This part that you're standing in now is original. We didn't do anything but paint and fix the walls and stuff like that. So there's a living room, there's a bedroom and a bathroom here. Upstairs is a bedroom and like an office. And then basically from the stairs back is all new. The back was like a disaster. The kitchen was super tiny little kitchen. And so we've been here like almost close to 6 years. And Richard Cruz was the architect. He lives actually down the street. He's building a house right across the street. It's another one. But it's been really good for these pasta tile floors here and there are all original. We added basically the white pasta tile, which some gets dirty, and every so often you have to have it buffed, and we can buff that out. We just haven't done it. It's like
It's on the list, right?
But, yeah, I mean, it's 3 bedrooms, there's 1 here, 2 upstairs, and, take a look.
Yeah, upstairs, the master bedroom and bath is.
This one was done by a good friend of mine, and he did it here. And,
The one at the end there,
yeah, we bought that in a gallery here, and this was from Chicago, and that was the Chicago skyline we had for a long time on the wall. Yeah. I'm not, my son's still living in a small house we have back there. It's a foot of snow. Sure.
this is good. So many of these in-city places feel fine
Well,
because of this open area.
you know, when we were looking, I think everybody, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people.
Well, I try to ignore it as best as I can because our house last night, the marshals afloat inside our door. And we're like right beside the street. And for an hour and a half, and they keep their engines running so the fumes are coming in. And they have their stereos blast, full blast for an hour and a half. And that's actually really
The hard is the stairs on the way, just like.
Underneath there. Yeah, and then it's a pressure system. And that's the there is a
They did have some beautiful pieces. I'm not sure if these works were all made locally, but I hope so. I especially like the Madonna. She does not look like any pictures of the Mother of Jesus that I have ever seen. The house next door is the only house in Merida with an original thatched roof. At the end of the last video, you did get a glimpse of the yard of this house. They're 2 different worlds, aren't they? This was my second favorite house. I love the painted walls. Wait a minute now. I didn't do this video. Let's move on. And the walls that were in this house were beautifully painted. Every wall is painted a different color. And no hot pinks, but the kitchen is gold. And now I thought I had a picture of the streets, but that didn't come across. So let's just keep moving on here. And to the copy that talks about the facades that the different houses have. And the picture shows the facades of the remodeled houses. Now, Tita's house has not been remodeled, so it looks like the house on the left. But you can see the difference. Once they've been remodeled, they paint them these beautiful, gorgeous colors. And you can see here the before and the after. And I also had a picture of the night on the streets. The one thing that I remember is that there was, I felt so totally safe. whether I was walking around during the day, of course, and also at night. And there was no warnings about, sometimes you get warnings about pickpockets or you should walk in groups, but that just wasn't the case. So I felt very, very safe. Now, the final video is of Tita's house, which is, of course, my absolute favorite. It was what I imagine the original home looked like, except for some modern amenities that Tita had done, such as the kitchen, and she put a pool in also. So there's 2 short clips of this. I wish I'd taken more of Tita's house, but why don't you take a look at those? I need to be the final video. Well, that's all the time we have for Getaway Girl in part 1 of the Yucatan, Merida, Mexico. I hope you're able to watch part 2, which will focus on the Mayan ruins that remain. Hopefully, you've learned more about why traveling takes you outside of yourself and into other places that can open you up to new people, new experiences, and new inspiration. I want to thank my outstanding crew, my director, Denise Ross, John Letts, David Nenow, Joe Curl, Lynn Likens, Alexis Hatfield, and Aroldi. I also want to thank Rogue Valley Community TV and SOU for providing the Digital Media Center for the recording and live broadcasting of public access shows created by members of our community for members of our community. To access Girl Talk, you can go to Archive Public Access Programming and click at the top of the page. Type in Getaway Girl and watch all episodes. Now, I'm also the producer of another Rogue Valley TV show, Girl Talk. Along with my co-host, Carol Voisin, we interview and showcase women of the Rogue Valley who are making a difference in our communities. Check it out on Channel 115 for Ashland HomeNet and 182 for Charter on Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. or Saturdays at 3. Or you can live stream on archive.org at any time. That's all for now for Getaway Girl. Thanks for watching, and bye.
Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Take a plane, take a train, take a car, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. No need to be far, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. The world is small, many ports to call, just getaway, getaway, getaway now.